this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
JJ, good to see you after a week off. How was the vacation, man?
It was great, man. It was great to hang out with the family. Everything, though, unraveled when I got home. Our upstairs air conditioner broke, and so we've been without that for a few days now, and that's where my office is at. So my upstairs, it's been like in the 80s, high 80s at times, and I've tried to, record some shows and get stuff done, and it has not been easy at all. But I gotta say, experiencing that heat inside the house, still somehow better than when I drafted Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, and someone drafted naked Matthew Stafford at the end of the 5th round last week. I'm JJ, and over the last couple of years, I've been doing everything I can to be a best ball bro. And last season, things finally fell into place. I got 40th in the DraftKings Millie contest, taking home $20,000. Maybe I became a best ball bro, but I'm still looking to learn more about this game. And I still want others to come on this ride with me. So even if you consider me a best ball bro, this could be your year. This could be the year that you officially become a best ball bro. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. We've partnered up with DraftKings again this year for Best Ball, and we've got a can't-miss offer on their biggest Best Ball contest ever. $20 million in total prizes. It's draft one, get one. Draft your team once, no weekly lineup management, and your top scorers start automatically each week, all season long. Download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app and sign up with promo code LATEROUND. Enter a lineup in the $20 million Best Ball contest for $25 and get a bonus ticket for a second entry. 2 shots at the title. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson and joined, as always, by Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, buddy?
Doing great, man. The football is behind us, and the football is ahead of us. I fired up 3 consecutive fast drafts last night after my work was finished. So I am full steam ahead for best ball and football season.
Yeah, I got some drafts in on vacation, which was great. When the kids went to bed, I was able to, just hang out in the living room. It's one of the best times. Like, the kids are settled. You had a long, fun day, and you just bust open the laptop and you're sitting there with your significant other, and, they're doing their thing and I'm doing my thing, and I'm just cranking out some drafts. So I am officially over the 80 mark with my Millie drafts so far. I have to say, so I'm going to talk about some exposures here in a second of some of the higher drafted players in terms of high ADP players, I should say. They're obviously higher drafted if I'm going to talk about the higher exposed players that I've drafted. The thing is, in these drafts, these 80 plus drafts, now I've done a couple more than 80. I have gotten the 110 in 14 of them.
What?
And it is the most tilting. I hit 80 and I put all my notes for today's show for the 80 drafts that I've done. And then I did 2 more since I put the show sheet together. And in both of those drafts, I drew the 110. So I have now gotten the 110 in 17% if you do the 82, 17% of my drafts. I've gotten the 101 3 times. And it is beyond frustrating, beyond tilting. So if you guys feel that pain, I feel it too. I'm not getting nearly enough Jahmyr Gibbs, and you can't do anything about it, right? Like, I'm sitting here and I'm like, I message Kitchen and Gadula about it, and Kitchen's like, you got to log out and log back in. Just change
draft
things
in
up a little bit.
incognito mode, something.
Yeah, right. Change things up a little bit, and maybe that will help. But what I do want to do really quick, we have a great guest on today's show. There's a long conversation. I bring up the air conditioner thing multiple times in that conversation because actually it was even warmer when I recorded that with our guests. So by the end of the 50 some minutes that we were talking, I'm literally sweating on the show. So just be prepared. If you're watching on YouTube, it gets pretty bad. And my face is red. It's just not a good scene at all. What I wanted to do is, since I am at that 80 mark, I'm going to go one by one through about 8 or 9 players who I am highest exposed to based on early ADP players. So I'm not talking Jonah Coleman is someone that I'm highest on right now that I have 30% exposure to. I actually talk about Coleman with our guest at the end of the conversation, so you guys can dig into that. We kind of just strayed away and just went off on a tangent, but I think people, hopefully will dig that. But I'm only talking about like top 6 or 7 rounds, essentially here, top 6 rounds mostly. So with that being said, I'm going to kick things off and first say that the only player out of this group that's been over 20% is the one that I'm going to bring up first. And that is Mr. Luther Burden. I kind of got Burden crazy one point in June and was just drafting him basically every time I was in the mid to late 4th round. I've been trying to get, even out the exposure a little bit more with Burden. I still think that there's a chance that Burden is a slight camp riser. Like, I still think there's at least some chance that we get a lot of hype and steam behind him. And because right now you're still finding drafts where he will slip into the beginning of the 5th round over on DraftKings. And so I think that there's room for him to grow and just kind of like jump in front of that giant tier of wide receivers, whether it be Jalen Waddle, who I also like, Terry McLaurin, T-Mac, Garrett Wilson, like all of those players. I think there's a chance that he has that like Zay Flowers effect that we've seen with Zay, where Zay kind of escaped from that group. And Emeka Egbuka has kind of escaped from that group to some degree as well. I think that there's a chance of that with Luther Burden, because what if Rome Odunze comes out, he doesn't look 100%. There's obviously already been steam from Ben Johnson saying that he's buying Luther Burden stock. And so I think that there's still some chance that his price rises a bit. I don't think it's going to get that much lower, more than likely. But yeah, I'm in on Burden this year. I've seen a lot of people say that they're out, that they don't understand this price point. And if you look at rookie season point per game marks, it's very rare for a player to really break out after such a low PPR point per game mark as Burden had. But my counter to that is, well, it's also rare to find a player who had that low of a point per game mark and such great per route run efficiency. There's a lot more to a profile than just looking at one singular metric and just crossing that dude off your list, because we haven't seen that historically. Now, if there are 6, 7, 8 metrics that are relatively predictive and all of them just say, hey, don't draft this guy, that's one of the reasons why I am a little bit scared of like a DJ Moore, let's say, even though I understand the fit in real life, then I think, yeah, you can make that claim. And it's more so for me. I don't think the Luther Burden stuff is simply all hype. Like, this isn't just like a fantasy football industry fabrication of what's going on. The freaking head coach of the team who handpicked him, who drafted him, right, is saying that he's buying Luther Burden stock. You can almost copy and paste what Ben Johnson was doing in Detroit from a personnel standpoint and kind of see what he's trying to do in Chicago with the playmakers that he has as well. And we know that easier, kind of lower ADOT, but also inside out role that will scheme guys is the Amon-Ra St. Brown role, right? And that's the role that Luther Burden is more than likely going to play in this offense. So I'm in on Burden this year. I'm at 25%, a little bit lower because I did 2 more drafts and I did not draft Burden. So let's just say 23% or something. But I am high on Burden this year. And, if you're listening to this, if you don't want to take that on, fine. If you want to be a little bit even, fine. But I would still recommend being over that 8% mark and being overweight on Burden versus the market.
Yeah, if it was just hype, then we wouldn't see Colston Loveland and Rome Odunze going as high as they were as well. People want pieces of this offense.
Yeah, something else I want to throw out there too is that I see a lot of like, if you're high on Parker Washington, then that means that you have to hate Brian Thomas. Like if you like Luther Burden, then you have to hate. No, because in an individual draft, you're making a bet on that player in that draft. To me, every draft is like an outcome for a particular season and how that would go down. There are hundreds and hundreds of outcomes and ways that things can go in a given year, right? But in your draft, in that 12-team draft that when you're picking those 20 players, you're saying to yourself, this is the way this is going to go down in this season's iteration, right? But a brand new draft means, hey, I'll take Colston Loveland at the end of round 4 if he falls, or middle round 4. And I'm not getting Luther Burden in that case, which in that case, for that particular lineup, yeah, I hope the breakout doesn't happen for Luther Burden for that lineup. I think it just goes to like the more of the probabilistic thinking and not handcuffing yourself to a take and just saying like, this has to happen in order for you to like this guy. If that were the case, then you would never buy into anything ambiguous in it from a draft board perspective, and it's just a silly thing to do.
Yeah, you nailed this on the Market Score episode that released on Tuesday with regards to the Jags and Bears receivers, where if you're just looking at a model's output and median outcomes, of course, things are muddled and gray, but the contingent upside for all 4 of these guys is pretty enticing.
Yeah, it's really enticing. Next guy I'll go to, I did draft him in one of the 2 drafts that I just did, Zay Flowers. So technically Zay Flowers is probably at the 20% mark at this point. I wasn't as in on Zay last year. He was more of a fade for me. He didn't have that great of a year, all things considered, from a fantasy production standpoint, because the Ravens, lose Lamar. Lamar wasn't that great when he came back, and they were a run heavy offense. And Zay, he had that final game where he boosted his end of season numbers quite a bit. And I think that we're doing ourselves a disservice a little bit with wide receiver in particular if we cite end of season finish with these guys when we know that it's incredibly flat. If you say that Zay Flowers finishes the wide receiver 12 and he's, 10 spots, 11 spots from Puka and JSN from last year, and then you look at the wide receiver 21 or 22 who would be 10 spots away from Zay, the wide receiver 22 to Zay is so much smaller. There's almost no difference and no delta compared to that difference between, one of the elite guys to Zay. So I think that when we speak like that, we're human, so we think in more of a linear nature, in a linear way, but it's really not that way at all. Last year, a wide receiver, there were 8 to 10 guys that were really good and everyone else was basically the same, which is what the death of the wide receiver 2 was all about at the beginning of the offseason in the podcast feed. With that being said, I'm bullish that this offense might be a little bit more pass heavy with Lamar being healthier, new offensive coordinator. And, it's the same logic that I used against Zay to a degree last year where, he's not used in the red zone very frequently. He's not used in the end zone very frequently, but you do lose Isaiah Likely, a piece that you could hypothetically say is, a threat down there, even though maybe the numbers aren't as strong and not that big of a deal. But he also just put together an incredible season. Zay Flowers did. And if you look at, the per route run stuff year over year, it's something that stuff is going to be a lot stickier for Zay than it has been in other seasons, just because it was so good last year. And then you look at his market score comps, and it's really hard to not get really excited. His point per game average with the market score comps, which is the episode that I did on Tuesday, but his point per game average is 15 and a half PPR points per game. I mean, he's still getting comps of JSN from last year. And it's a very intriguing and fun profile. I've taken him at towards the beginning of the 3rd round at times just to get a little bit of a differentiated lineup. But when he falls to the late 3rd, I'm basically getting him all the time. And like I said, I've gotten the 110 so freaking frequently that I've just gotten a lot of Zay Flowers as a result of that too.
Yeah, I'm looking. I pulled up my ADP data, and he's right there, sitting there at the end of the 3rd. So it correlates with where you're drafting. I pulled up last year as well. I was curious where Zay finished in ADP last year in best ball, and it was in the 6th round. So to see him jump up from the 6th round to the 3rd round, he is coming off his best season, obviously 1,200 yards. But like you said, so much of that boosted by that game where he goes nuclear.
Yeah, that final game, that first game, he went nuclear as well. He really, if you had Zay, because I still had Zay, I had him as a fade last year, but I still had him in some leagues, and it wasn't the most fun experience.
It was not a smooth ride. Yeah,
right. And so, but I do think it'll be smoother this year.
But yeah, at cost, this is it's harder to see him go higher than this. But to your point of this Ravens offense, an interesting mystery box in and of itself with the new coaching staff there. So,
yeah, I should throw out there too. I have 15% Lamar Jackson. He's my highest. Him and Jalen Hurts both at 15%. I'll go a little bit quicker through this, but they are my highest roster quarterbacks right now. It goes back to everything we've talked about quarterback with guests, on in our intros before the guests. It's just this idea that I have a very hard time knowing that these guys are going in the late, Lamar will slip to the 6th sometimes. And I have a hard time knowing that those guys will be going in the 5th to 7th round, when in the 9th round, you're going to be reaching for an inferior player, an inferior quarterback, when we know these guys can break fantasy football. Now, with that being said, quarterback, and I talk about this with our guest today, but quarterback doesn't have the best advance rates, even when they have a nuclear season. So I think that is important. But I just love the flexibility that those round 5 to 7 quarterbacks give you in these drafts. You're not feeling forced. You can let value drop. There's just a lot of upside from that perspective in drafting them. So Lamar and Jalen Hurts are both at 15%. No surprise with Lamar, given I've been drafting Zay Flowers. I have Terry McLaurin at 19%. I've talked about him on the show before as well, and he's in the draft guide as a player to target this year. He had his best per route run efficiency last year, despite his age, despite the quarterback situation. You get a new offensive coordinator that I'm bullish on. and you get Jaden Daniels healthy. So I think Terry McLaurin, there's no signal to me that he's fallen off at all, from a talent perspective. So given the competition there, even if they get a Stephon Diggs, I think it's going to be fine for Terry McLaurin. I also have 16% Ashton Genty. That is probably my go-to like round 1 to 2 running back that I've kind of gravitated towards most. I'm trying to get a little bit more like Kenneth Walker. I haven't drafted enough of him, and I want to be a little bit flatter. I probably don't want to finish at 16% with Genty, but I'd be okay with the 12 to 14% range. The volume should be there. I love the fit in Clint Kubiak's offense, and I love the potential upgrade at quarterback. And the offensive line should be a lot better this year than it was last year with their additions and Cole Miller coming back. So Ashton Genty at 16%. I have JSN at 16% as well. And the main reason for that is I know I've been getting the 10 spot a lot, but I've been getting the 5 to 7 spot a lot too. And the problem is I'll take him at 5, but then he falls sometimes to 6 and 7. And so I'll take him at 6 and 7 as well. So this is more of I know that JSN is going to regress to a degree because he was so efficient last year, but I think Seattle's going to throw the ball more this year because their defense is just not going to be able to repeat that performance year over year. It's just something that we see all the time with defenses in football. And as a result of that, I think they're going to naturally not be in as great of scripts. And if they're not in as great of scripts, not only that, look at the running back situation. The fact that we're talking about like Jadarian Price, who was never a bell cow in college, and they're already talking about George Halani and Emmanuel in this like running back by committee. I don't know how much they're going to lean on that run game necessarily. So I think there's reasons to be bullish on the passing attack, and that volume can combat the regression from an efficiency standpoint for JSN. He's also just a stud. Like, I don't know. I'm trying not to overthink the JSN stuff and be like, oh, I'm going to draft Justin Jefferson over JSN. It's like, there's a lot of red flags still with Justin Jefferson's profile. How do we know that Kyler's going to work out? Like, at least we have some stability going on with Seattle. So I'm cool. Like, if you want to take Amon-Ra St. Brown over him, fine, like whatever. But I've been in the 5 spot, the 6 spot, and the 7 spot so frequently that I've just gotten a lot of JSN. So he's another one. And then real quick to close this out, Jalen Waddle, 15%. When I go through the market trends that I do in the draft guide for this range of the draft, Jalen Waddle checks basically every single box. I think Jalen Waddle might end up being my favorite value in season long this year in the early-ish rounds. Like he might end up being that guy based on where he's being drafted on some of these bigger platforms, from a season long perspective. And I get him a lot. Like, I think that you can get him as early as the 3-4 turn on DraftKings if you really want to get more exposure. Like, I think that's totally fine given the circumstance there. And then the final 2 are 2 Bengals. I have 15% Chase Brown and I have 15% T Higgins, but that's partially, again, based on where I'm drafting so frequently. That 110, you get him at the end of the 3rd. He's fallen to the 4th frequently for me. And there's contingent upside. I think T Higgins is just kind of undervalued in best ball, where we know spiked week ability is there for him. But then there's contingent upside if Jamar Chase were to go down. Then all of a sudden, like, I've said this before, but I always think through this when I'm drafting my teams is what would happen? Like, where would T Higgins be drafted if Jamar Chase were not in the picture, right? Would he not be a Nico Collins, if not higher than him type pick, right? Like,
yeah, he would be in that late second. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Right. And so I think that there's, we know there's at least some upside there. So T Higgins is the last guy in that 15% range. Those are the guys where I'm at early. I think a lot of that's going to change, hopefully just based on where I draft, because it's still only 80 drafts. I'm only a little bit more than halfway there, but I feel pretty good about all of those individual players. Like, I'm not really upset about having, because like not only that, but all of them, maybe Genty aside, maybe JSN aside, and maybe McLaurin aside, but they're all in like pretty good offenses, like offensive ecosystems that I don't think they're going to like completely destroy me unless an injury happens to one of them.
And I think Genty is the exact right bet out of that running back cluster. Like, who is going to be the running back in that 5 running back cluster? I mean, you could even extend it to include Chase Brown, Achane, and Henry. Like, who from that cluster are we going to look back and say, wow, maybe they should have been competing with the mid to early first round guys? And
right.
How about a pass catching guy with a team that invested heavily in its offensive line, drafted a quarterback, plays most of its games indoors? Like, everything's there for him.
Yeah, I agree. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from people about like, well, you've talked about rookie quarterbacks being bad for their personnel, their pass catchers and their running backs, etc. Yeah, I mean, like that. And I talked about this on the show before on a mailbag episode. that's more of a proxy to tell you that rookie quarterbacks tend to just underperform in general versus our expectations. But the idea here is that the system itself, the offensive line, all of the above, the lack of weaponry outside of Brock Bowers, all of the above, which, by the way, Brock Bowers, for anyone curious, I'm at like 13% or so right now. But aside from Brock Bowers, it's like, there's a lot to like about the volume that Ashton Genty could see in that backfield in a good, with a guy like Clint Kubiak. And I think that naturally, no offense to your boy Gino, but I think that, when you add in the offensive line and the quarterback potential upgrade, just given the environment, I'm not even necessarily going to say that it was all Gino last year. The way that you combat a bad environment is through volume in fantasy football. And I think Ashton Genty at the very least is going to see that to be able to like meet ADP. But if the offense is just better than we expect, then he could be a top 3 running back in fantasy.
Yeah, he could, to call back to Brandon's episode with you, he could kind of PPR merchant himself, but at the same time be extremely talented and be able to break off massive plays at the same time.
Yeah. And I'm not worried about last year's efficiency. There's literally no correlation with year 1 yards per carry and how volume is what you should be focused on more than anything like yards per carry. And not only that, but he was second worst in the league in yards before contact per attempt. Only Quinshot Judkins was worse last year. So, obviously the offensive line played a role, but they're getting really good players added to that line, whether through injury return or just through free agency. So I'm into Ashton Genty. Okay, let's talk about this guest. I brought him up a couple times. He was on the show last year. People really liked our conversation last year, so I thought, hey, we should run this back this year. But it's Tod Burros, who has played best ball for a very long time, very active on Twitter at Best Ball NFL. We kind of went in a lot of different directions with this conversation, and so hopefully people enjoy that aspect because it wasn't, more of like a interviewer answer type scenario. Like we went back and forth and we hashed some things out, and I think that people will hopefully enjoy that. But we chatted about a really unique way that Tod likes to stack, the problems that we run into with certain team builds and roster construction. And then, like I said, we had some conversations too that strayed away from the show sheet. So it was a really good time. I hope that comes out when you listen to it. But without further ado, here is my interview with Tod Burros.
For adults with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis symptoms, every choice matters. Tremfya offers self-injection or intravenous infusion from the start. Tremfya is administered as injections under the skin or infusions through a vein every 4 weeks, followed by injections under the skin every 4 or 8 weeks. If your doctor decides that you can self-inject Tremfya, proper training is required. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active Crohn's disease and adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions, increased risk of infections or lower ability to fight them, and liver problems may occur. Before treatment, get checked for infections and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or need a vaccine. Explore what's possible. Ask your doctor about Tremfya today. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
All right, Tod, first off, I have to preface, right now my AC is broken in the upstairs of my house and my office is upstairs. And so, but if you're watching this on YouTube, by the end of this recording, not only that, I have a cold right now too, but by the end of this recording, I will be sweating. There's no doubt in my mind.
And I will just say that it's because of all the hot takes that I give, right? Like I am going to take complete responsibility for you sweating. Man, I had JJ on. JJ had me on. Dude was sweating. My takes were so hot.
Yes, exactly. I'm looking forward to this conversation, though. We had a really good talk last year. I thought that you brought some really unique perspective to best ball in this best ball space as I've gone on this journey of becoming, maybe I am now a best ball bro, but I love to hear other perspectives on this. So let's just start. What's a mistake that you think drafters are making this year? In other words, when we look back on this season, what do you think that we could point to as being the reason that people didn't do so well?
The two biggest overall things I found this year is even more than normal. I think the field is overreacting to the small sample size. That's just an inherent part of best ball, right? In DFS football, 17, 18, 20 slates a year, mini slates. And so best ball, we've literally only had 5 to 7 slates so far. And this year, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I feel like even the smart people are just overreacting. I mean, we hear a lot of talk about small sample size in the community, but the way the board has laid out this year, and people are just seemingly completely overreacting to what happened last year, which is what opens up a big opportunity for this year. Last year, I know I brought this up a bit about how my biggest epiphany was that I went from being too much of an advance week bro to too aggressive, right? Like, so my goal last year was to dial it back. And I not only had my best advance rate in 3 years, but I also got a team into the underdog finals, and it came in 63rd. Nice. So nice. I feel like I went for and accomplished a nice balance, but I feel like the field this year is spending all this time trying to advance. We don't hear much about correlation anymore. We don't hear much about week 17. We don't hear about stacking. It's just get your quarterbacks and get your running backs. What is the most interesting thing to me in best ball is trying to figure out ways to get through the pod so that you get to week 17, because that's the hardest thing to figure out.
Refresh my memory a little bit, because you talked about this a little bit last year, but your strategy about handling week 15 and 16, I think you said that you sort of try to trick the pods a little bit. How are you refining that?
In the past, there's a couple ways to do it. There's stacking without a quarterback, like at receiver, hoping that, 1 week, one guy goes off, gets you into the next week. But my favorite way to do it is by stacking a running back, particularly a cheap backup running back, with a stack, right? And most people don't do that. But we all know that in a good offense, 1 week it could be the running game that gets you there. The next week it gets you the passing game. And Charbonnet, and I did trick the pods a little bit. I got to week 17 with Charbonnet, Darnold, and JSN. And Charbonnet had a huge week 16. And there was this nut matchup with Darnold and JSN week 17 that they completely didn't hit. Another 15 points and I'd be a lot wealthier man. The difference between like 10th and 63rd is a lot of money.
Oh, I feel you. Yeah. So speaking of like how people are handling things this year and how, you kind of see it as being reactionary. First off, do you buy that drafters are approaching best ball differently this year, specifically with running backs? And then for you personally, are you going with mostly running back heavy builds?
No. So I'm doing the same strategy that I did last year. We've seen running back price in my mind this year kind of Wile E. Coyote over the cliff a bit, based on 2 years where running backs mostly stayed healthy. So that I feel is exactly what I mean when I talked about the short-sighted way people are thinking about things. And you have even really smart people in the industry who I believe in, think of incredibly smart guys saying, got to get your running backs, got to get your running backs. Well, my strategy has been, again, the key thing is balance, right? I don't want to overreact and go to zero running back. It doesn't fit what I do. I also don't think it fits the board as much. But with the quarterbacks moving up, with the running backs moving up, the one group that has really kind of fallen is the backup running backs, who for years it was like, zero running back, get your backup running backs, and this year no one seems to be interested in them, but they're just as likely to crush when you need them as they ever were. So I've been doing a lot of hero running back builds. And again, I'll have a couple, the other big point of emphasis for me is to mix up my builds more, not get locked into one strategy so much. Pat Kerrane, when he was a big zero running back guy, won, Best Ball Mania with a 2 running back start. Right. You want to mix up your builds, but the majority of my builds are nothing makes me happier, especially early when you could get some really good people at the 2-3 turn, getting that Bijan and the Gibbs, and then really pushing running back to about the 10th round, and then taking 6 or 7 of them. I think fundamentally one of the key things that I believe that's different than most best ball people is that early is when you want to take a chance on the late guys because there's a lot of uncertainty. Now everyone seems to want to have certainty at the running back position. Well, in a couple weeks, some of these late guys who are 18th, 16th, 17th, 18th round guy are going to win a role, or someone's going to get hurt. And they're going to, look at what happened with Bill last year on the Redskins. He went from an 18th round pick to like a 10th round pick. Right. I want to have those kind of guys in the 18th round, in the 17th round. And then when we start getting more certainty, then I will be more likely to go to 5 running backs instead of 6 or 7. But for now, I want that. I don't want to have to get the whole backfield to get lucky. But if I have that great hero running back, take another one in the Jaylen Warren kind of Ramondre range, occasionally a little earlier in that Swift, Tootin, Henderson range, and then just really load up on guys in the 13th through the 18th. I know some of them aren't going to hit right out of the gate, but some of them might. And then the premise behind it is still those guys can hit in the playoff weeks when you really need them.
So with that being said, are there any early round running backs, rounds 1, 2, maybe into 3, that you are just not on this year?
I mean, so one other big point of emphasis for me is I don't want to completely fade and act like explosive guys are invisible. So
you're right.
So last year, Derrick Henry was invisible to me. And boy, I was a genius right up until week 17 when he was the guy.
It's funny. It's funny. Derrick Henry specifically for me, I think I was at like 4.5%, 5% last year with Henry. I had him on my finals team for the Millie.
Nice.
And so he was the key.
Oh, you probably got a nice payday.
Yeah, I was top 40 in the Millie last year.
Oh, that's awesome.
But it was, you
really
but to your
become
point,
a best ball bro.
Yeah, that's right. But to your point, I've found as well, I think this is what you're alluding to, this notion. I wasn't like super high on Henry last year. Like I said, I was like 4.5%, 5%. So I was underweight on Derrick Henry. But those earlier round guys, it is very, very difficult. Even like if you're not into Devon A, I know it's a sexy thing to not be into Devon Achane.
Yeah, I mean that guy that gets 5.7 yards a carry. I don't want any of him.
Right, it's like it's hard for me. And there are definitely some sites and some platforms, and from a season long perspective and stuff, where I think he is more of a fade. But regardless of that, I'm still drafting Devon Achane because if you do enough drafts, you're also going to end up getting values in certain spots as well. Is that basically how you're feeling though? Is that you want that blanket, if you will?
I'm trying to be more open to explosive guys that I don't. I'm more open to guys who we need to build portfolios where we're overweight and underweight. But human nature is we don't like to make a lot of decisions. That's just part of being human. So if you don't like a guy, I mean, you hear it on Twitter every day. These are the 6 guys I will not be drafting in any draft today. Okay, great. Go for that. I hope it wasn't Derrick Henry week 17. Right. So
exactly.
It's a combination of taking those guys occasionally, but also mixing them in on teams where maybe you're real happy with your team or they fall a little bit more than they normally do. But trying to put them in situations, that's where correlating week 17, like if I take Derrick Henry, I'm much more likely to try and come back with T. Higgins the next round.
Right.
Because that could be a really great week 17 game. Again, that was the short sample last year. The last 2 years, because it's funny, I've heard a lot of smart people say the same thing. I want to be more open to the guys that I would have faded. And it's because Derrick Henry went nuclear week 17. Kyle Pitts was another guy a lot of people hated, and that's who you needed week 15. The key is to do it smart and not get caught up in being one-sided with your takes.
Yeah.
And then building smarter, building every team as if it is going to make week 17. You don't know, you don't want to, you don't want to hurt your chances of getting to week 17 too much by just focusing on it. But you want every team that gets there to have a story. So like for me, tricking the pods, having that backup running back with a stack where if one of the two goes nuclear week 16, now the other one is low owned week 17. And to get the backup running back with your stack doesn't cost you anything. Right? If you've got Brock Purdy and Evans, if you want to add Jordan James, you can get him in the 20th round on DraftKings, right? Josh Allen, right? Should I take Josh Allen with Cook? Well, maybe, but boy, I can get him with Ray Davis whenever I want him.
Let's talk about exposure really quick since we're kind of on the topic right here. The question I get a lot is sort of how much exposure should we have with a certain player? I know that you mentioned last year you tend to max out around like that 25% mark on certain players. Has your philosophy changed at all year over year based on what you're speaking on here? Or is it, are you like, I know people talk about that like 4% blanket and stuff and making sure that you have some exposure to some of those early round guys.
There's other people who mock that and act like, and are like, well, I don't need, and all I can say is I've always had a 5 to 15% rule for first and second round picks because they're all really good players.
They're good players. Yeah.
And every year you see huge win. The largest win rates or advance rates are almost always with guys in the first and second round. They're the guys who push the needle. And the guys who get supercharged are the ones who not only have a good season, but go next to the guys who either get hurt or something crazy happened, right?
Yeah.
And we don't know who's going to get hurt. I'll never forget famously, I was back in the Saints days, I was like, I can't take Kamara or Michael Thomas. There's no way both of them pay off their first round grade. Well, one year Kamara got hurt. One year Michael Thomas got hurt. And I had none of the other guy, basically.
Yeah.
Right? So I have a 5 to 15 rule. I tend to get to about 25 to 30 on a couple people each year because you do want to take stands. But I'm spending a lot more time in time boxes, making sure that I'm mixing up who I'm taking players with. It's easy during a long season to get caught up in, like right now I'm super into Ray Davis. I wasn't a couple months ago. But I want to make sure that, I took some Ray Davis when I didn't like him. And because you have a group of guys you're hot on in any window, I'm trying to be more like an optimizer. And yes, I want to have a lot of Ray Davis right now. I think he's one of the best late round picks. But I also want to make sure I'm not forgetting some of the other guys that I like, maybe not as much, but like Damon Claiborne. Or a couple of the other late running backs, Tank Bigsby, because we don't know who's going to get the injury. I want to mix it up more. But rules are made to be broken, and I do have a guy in the second round who I want to be about 20% on this year. So let's save that for one of your other questions.
The teaser. I like the teaser.
We're gonna get the heat up in the kitchen a little bit.
Yeah. I'm not quite sweating yet, but by the end, I'm actually shocked I'm not, because number one, I'm a sweater, and number two, I'm not even joking when I say that it's about 90 degrees.
No, I believe you. So. You have my empathy, and I appreciate after the preparing that I did that you're playing through pain, right? You are playing through pain, and we appreciate that.
All right, let's talk tight end. I know that you do like Brock Bowers at cost.
And that's the guy.
Does that mean that okay, that's the guy. That's the dude?
Yeah.
That's the dude. Okay.
I want at least 20% of Brock Bowers this year.
Yeah, I'm pretty into Brock Bowers too. Does that mean that you're not into the other earlier round tight ends? What's your general tight end approach? Is it like Brock Bowers or bust for you this year?
It's not. I mean, 20% means I've got 80% of other people. I think one of the interesting things about the way the board has laid out this year is with quarterback moving up, with running back moving up. Basically, what you're running into is I like different tight end. There's a lot of tight end ADPs that I like this year. So one of my other like Fannin, based on a couple nonsense things, and he doesn't have a quarterback. He's now like 9th round, 10th round, right? Like he's dropped about 2 rounds, and I sort of liked him where he was. So a couple months ago, I was really into Tyler Kraft. I thought he was a great pick. But now a little further back, you get not only Fannin, who I like, but Laporta. I mean, really talented guy going very late. You don't need, with tight ends, I found you don't need the number 1 tight end, but typically there's 3 guys every year that you want, that just outperform the top 3, and they can come from anywhere on the board. So I mix up my tight end exposures. Historically, tight ends do not have the advance rate that running backs and wide receivers. They don't move the needle in that way. Even Travis Kelce in his best years was about 40%, where you can get 50, 60% at the right running back or wide receiver. So I would say that tight end for me is more about being different than the field and making sure that I have enough strength in that group that it accentuates what I'm doing with the rest of that team.
Yeah. You mentioned it with quarterbacks and how quarterbacks are going earlier. It's been a really interesting conversation piece with guests on this show talking about the quarterback position. It's just strange how, you get these typical QB1s, Josh Allen aside, you get the typical QB1s going maybe a little bit earlier than they otherwise would be, or in a spot where they generally would go, but the QB2s are getting pushed up some.
That's exactly my point. What's happened is because running backs have been pushed up, the top quarterbacks other than Josh Allen are actually cheaper than they were last year.
Yeah, right. They're right? Like they're more. I'm getting more of that tier than I've ever gotten in my best ball history. Let's say my best ball life.
But it ties into your original late round QB theory, right? If you get 2, but you get them in the window, right? That was your theory. Right. You get 2, but 2. But if it was 2 top 15 guys, but if you get those 2 in the window, it could win. So to me, what we've seen is because everyone has to have the cool kids are all getting 3 quarterbacks, so everyone needs 3 quarterbacks. Right. It's pushed up the weaker quarterbacks.
Right.
But the good, really good guys who could break fantasy are actually cheaper. So I've got a lot of Jaden Daniels. I've got a ton of Justin Herbert. I've got a lot of Trevor Lawrence. I love Dart. I love Purdy. There's like 6 or 7, 8 guys in that range. And again, I don't want to win at quarterback because they're not the big advance rate position. Right. And you don't know which game is going to blow up week 15, 16, 17. I want to mix all that up. And then there's one other guy who's going later than he had the last 2 years, and that's Baker Mayfield, who I really like, who if I miss, he's my number 1 target. He was hurt, played through injury. Most guys would have went on IR. His offensive line was hurt. His receivers were hurt. But everyone just wants to focus in on what happened last year to that team. And, of course, Mike Evans left. Well, Igbuka's still there. Not that I like him as much as his ADP, but Godwin is there. McMillan is one of my most owned players. So that is really my focus at quarterback.
The really interesting part about QB for me is that when you finish a draft and you're sitting in like round 9 or something and you decide to go running back instead of getting a quarterback or something, and you finish a draft and you look back, because if you do pass in round 9, round 10, which is where a lot of these really good, lower QB1s, high end QB2s will end up going. If you pass on one and you then feel the panic a little bit, because other people are drafting 3 quarterbacks and that you need to complete stacks or you want a 3 quarterback build yourself, and you finish the draft and you look at it and you're like, why didn't I just take Brock Purdy in round 10 when CJ Stroud is going around and a half?
Especially since the running backs there are just okay.
You're right. It's not the opportunity cost just is not significant enough to do that. Right.
So,
exactly.
Eric Bimfor of Spike Week. I'm big into the Spike Week Discord. Hello to those guys in there. I mean, it's the best Discord for best ball. It is high level intelligent stuff that we can just bounce off each other every day. But Eric did a pod earlier in the year where he says, I'm just getting my 2 quarterbacks. I'm just not playing that game. Right. Now, occasionally, I want some Jordan Love. I like Baker Mayfield. I want some Malik Willis. But I'm acting for the most part like the guys after Malik Willis aren't there in 18 rounds and a lot of times in 20 rounds. I just don't think those guys have the kind of upside that some of the late quarterbacks who went in the 16th and 18th round in previous years have. Right. So if that's what beats me this year, I'll just tip my hat. But I just don't want to chase quarterback in most of my drafts.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I don't do it in every draft is because of the exposure discussion we just had. I still want some exposure to some of the guys where that cost is being incurred. Right. But at the same time, over on DraftKings, for instance, you're going to go in the late 7th into the mid 8th round. And that's where Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, those guys are going to get drafted. And the wide receivers that you're drafting them over are like Cortland Sutton, which it's fine. Like Cortland, you might love Cortland Sutton. That's fine. Or like DK Metcalf.
Might not love Cortland Sutton.
Yeah.
You might love Pat Bryant in the 20th round.
Exactly. But someone like they're players that really aren't gonna move you. They're not gonna get you so excited. A wide receiver, even the running backs, where you're in ambiguous backfield territory, so you do want to throw some darts, eventually and get some exposure. But again, you can go a round or 2 later, and on DK, Jonathan Brooks is still going that late. Like he's still just as much of an upside swing as some of the other running backs you'd be getting 2 rounds earlier. So again, I just feel like the way that the typical draft goes for me is that I'm staring at these quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts goes in round 7 consistently, and I'm staring at these guys and I'm like, there's not a big enough difference between the running backs and wide receivers that I'd be drafting here versus what I'd be getting 2 rounds later. Whereas if quarterback starts going and the run starts, you can't just say, I'm going to ignore this run because quarterback supply does run out. It does get to a point where you're like, oh crap, Bryce Young is the top available quarterback. And Bryce Young, from my perspective, I just don't look at a guy like Bryce Young and think this guy's going to win me anything in fantasy football. It's just not something that
Cam Ward, pretty much the same thing.
It's tough.
Could happen. Anything could happen.
Yeah, I would argue even with Ward, at least we haven't seen, with Bryce Young, we have multiple seasons of data of him in this offense and all, there's at least some of this mystique, with a guy like Ward. Whereas Bryce Young, I'm like, we know what we're getting at this point. Generally
he's too
speaking.
Inconsistent. It's not that he can't have good weeks, but he's not going to really help your advance rate most likely.
Yeah, it doesn't help that he has a Week 17 matchup against the Seahawks. Either,
and again, we can overrate that. Bad matchups a little bit.
I totally agree.
Again, there's 2 advantages, and you've hit on them, but I'll summarize. One is they're just the best picks where they go. right? They're cheaper than where, Drake May going in the 5th, 6th round. I mean, Drake May could, I thought of something interesting because everyone talks about how they had such a bad schedule last year and they're not going to be able to do it again this year because they have a better schedule. And then I saw someone post on Twitter, just basically they shut Drake May down in the second half last year, right? Yeah. So it's actually a good thing that they're playing a tougher schedule if you're a Drake May guy. If I have the stack, it's easy. If I have Ladd McConkey, I'm taking Justin Herbert if he's there. If I have one of the Dallas wide receivers, I'm taking Dak. There's enough really good ones in that range. It's not like you're going to get too much of them because there's like 12 of them, right? From Lamar down to, for me, it's Dart or Mahomes. It's like 12 guys, right?
Yeah, you could even go. I mean, you could even argue to Kyler, Bo Nix.
I like Kyler a lot. I think Kyler is has always been pretty good for fantasy football.
Yeah, exactly.
And people don't like him because he can't do this and he can't do that. I'm definitely overweight on Kyler. He's another one of my. That's like if I have Justin Jefferson or I take Addison and I miss on that second quarterback, so what I'm doing, and then there's a couple like Drake May, Justin Herbert, who you can backstack in that range. Yep. Jackson Dart, you can backstack. You get Isaiah Likely, you take Mooney. It's not the best thing, but it's perfectly reasonable, right?
Yeah.
And those guys can score points and get you there without a true number one. Right? Like Ladd McConkey's going as the true number one. Is he going to be? Maybe, probably, but maybe not. Maybe one of my favorite players, Oronde Gadsden, is the guy you need. Right? So I think that you're accomplishing two things. You're getting a really great value overall to build your team, which to me is always my most important thing. I want as much talent on my team as I can. And then I want to take all these other strategies to fit it together and make a coherent story. But the second thing is if you get those two quarterbacks, you don't have to think about quarterback anymore.
Right. It's nice.
It's out. Like if I take Brock Bowers in the second and I get two quarterbacks one in the 5th, one in the 8th, I've stacked. Boy, it makes the rest of the draft really easy. I can just cherry pick value, right? Guys that I really like that fell in that draft.
For adults with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis symptoms, every choice matters. Tremfya offers self-injection or intravenous infusion from the start. Tremfya is administered as injections under the skin or infusions through a vein every 4 weeks, followed by injections under the skin every 4 or 8 weeks. If your doctor decides that you can self-inject Tremfya, proper training is required. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active Crohn's disease and adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions, increased risk of infections or lower ability to fight them, and liver problems may occur. Before treatment, get checked for infections and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or need a vaccine. Explore what's possible. Ask your doctor about Tremfya today. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
That's one thing that goes unnoticed, I think, a lot in these discussions just about like roster optimization and strategy and such is the flexibility in the late rounds in obtaining some of that, the falling value, like you're saying. If you're stuck and you're like, oh crap, I only have 3 running backs and it's round 15 or something like that, and you're like, I got to just pound running back from here on out, then you're going to be missing out on all of the other values that potentially exist at why. And it's so tilting as you're doing that and you're sitting there and you're seeing this guy who's sitting 2 rounds later than he typically sits, and you can't go after him just because of the way your particular build is sitting, right? So I do think that the flexibility aspect of things is something that really does go unnoticed.
Yeah, and I think that's an advanced best ball thought, and it's not one that'll get you clicks.
Sure.
But it is really, really important to be a really good best ball player in my mind.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And also knowing where in each draft the values are, right? Like I like Jonah Coleman a lot, right?
Oh, me too.
I like Emmett Johnson a lot. I like Claiborne. I like Tank Bigsby. So I know those guys will be there. So I just need to have enough strength in my running position, back position early that I can mix and match them while, like lately I've been very hot on Denzel Boston. I'm very high on Jalen McMillan, where I don't have to take a running back there if I don't want to. So one of my key things that I've always focused on is sometimes there's someone when you pick in the 4th, 5th, 6th round that you're just so excited about that he's there, you're taking him, right? Doesn't matter about your build. You got plenty of time to fill it out. But as a fallback, if there's a bunch of guys and I'm like, right? I want to keep my build as even as I can because then it gives me the flexibility to not have happen what you just mentioned later.
Yeah, it's underrated. It's underrated. And this honestly, to me, through doing this, is one of the disadvantages to doing a true zero RB draft is that you do lack flexibility once you get out of like round 6, is that if you get a falling wide receiver value, it's not nearly as easy to snag that value up and snatch it because you are already overweight at that position and you're going to be struggling in other positions. I'm not saying that you can't go zero RB. I'm just saying that it's a thing that you should be thinking about as you deploy these strategies as your drafts are going on. It's something that should be top of mind.
For a couple years, zero RB became a cult. And if you didn't do it, the cult was like, oh no, and now the cult's telling you have to have 3 running, which is so funny that the same guys who would shame you for not going 0 running back are now shaming you because you're not drafting 3 running backs in the first 4 rounds.
Well, the first year I did this, so this is year 3 of the show, and the first year I did it, I didn't have great success with it was the first year that I was really max entering and play, doing like 1,000 drafts.
It takes time to get good at it.
And like I had always played, but not to that, volume and such. And I went so heavy with the same structure over and over again, largely zero RB. And I had a bad year, just not a good season. Changed it up last year, and I'm doing it again this year where I still have some zero RB teams. Don't get me wrong. Like every once in a while I'll draft
every year I will have, again, like if I'm in round 4 and I've got 2 wide receivers and Bach Bowers and Neighbors is sitting there at the end of the 4th round somehow. Sure. Yeah. I'm taking Neighbors and I'm going to figure out running back in that draft.
Right. Like you can still you still do those things based on the falling values and such. But I do think that, being so stuck on that one approach, like I said, and like you were saying, it's so important to recognize how handcuffed it makes you as you go through the draft. If you're not, balancing things out, if you don't, just know that if you're not having you don't have to have the balanced approach. I'm saying though, if you don't have that balanced approach, understand that means you're not going to have as easy of a time finding those falling values late.
I tend to be too risk averse, right? I think every human is either leans a little too risk averse or a little too safety averse. You need to know yourself. And you need to push yourself out of whatever your comfort zone is, because everyone's a hero and boasting that they, that I don't care about safety. I'm here to win $1 million. And then I can't tell you how many guys like that eventually took on my strategy for exposure, because I got that strategy because one year I went real heavy and I got crushed, right? Smart people learn from their mistakes.
I want to talk about week 17 because we kind of touched on it earlier. I saw a really interesting theory. It might have come from Pete Overzet, but he was talking about how people aren't talking about week 17 correlation, which you alluded to earlier, as much this year, partially because there are so many streamers that are streaming with overlays and tools and such and optimizers for while they're drafting. And so they're not having to speak aloud about those correlations. Do you buy into that at all? Or do you think that it's just one of those things where it's just not a hot enough topic for people to really get into?
Yeah, I lean towards it being that it was the hot topic for 2 years and now it's not.
Yeah.
I went to the Spike Week tools and I looked at every early correlation. So like Derrick Henry, how many times he was with Jamar Chase Brown, Higgins for every week 17 game. And I've done that in past years, and you would see a 10, 15, sometimes 20% increase if there was a guy who was correlated. I don't think people are correlating early intentionally, and I think that's the big advantage. A lot of people also think, and there's nothing wrong with doing this, like if I have Drake May and Pat Bryant, who I like anyway, is in the 17th.
Yeah.
Boy, that makes it easy, right? I get a week 17 correlation, but so many times when we just drop in a late guy in to either a stack or a correlation, it doesn't have the effect of doing it with really talented guys early. And you add that to something, again, that we talk about a lot in Spike Week. ADP is so static early. And really the chance of these guys what's the chance that, Saquon Barkley is going to be that much better than Chase Brown?
Right.
Or Breece Hall.
That whole tier is, right. A lot of those guys are just in a giant tier.
So mix it up. And part of that, not all the time you mix it up, but having unique early pairings, even in tournament best ball, it's really important, I think, in which I don't play like on drafters because I can't in Pennsylvania. But I think that moving guys up, it just doesn't happen. Moxie, who's one of the guys that he did studies on that. People just don't move up. So, sometimes I'll move up a Zay Flowers so that I can get him with T. Higgins later. They go right near each other. And now Zay's moved up a little bit, so occasionally you can get it. But getting those correlations early, even if you don't end up getting one of the two quarterbacks in the game, those guys could, a few years ago they were late, but Amon-Ra, St. Brown, and Penny both went off in a week 17 game.
Yep.
And if you didn't have that correlation, you didn't win money.
Right.
So there's definitely advantages to it, and there's more advantages because people aren't doing it as much.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with some people where I think ADP in general is just so forced by stacking, of course, right?
Right.
Quarterbacks will go.
Joe Burrow goes way earlier than he probably should because if the Chase guy doesn't get him, the Higgins guy's going to take him.
Exactly. And you can always tell, the unstacked the quarterbacks like Jackson Dart who don't have. Obviously you have Malik Neighbors, but people are iffier on Neighbors. And there's only one player for Jackson Dart to really stack early. When that's the case, then those guys can fall a little bit from a pure value perspective. But then the other piece to that, though, from an ADP standpoint is the stacking stuff, the week 17 stuff that you're talking about a little bit. And it's very easy to get in this like robotic mode where you're like, oh, I don't really want to take Kenneth Walker at 202 if sometimes he's going to fall to 206. Because I can just wait and get the value when that draft happens and I'm in the 206 spot but in the end, it's like you gotta think about the probability and the realistic outcomes of all of these players and how tight, there's a reason that they're tiered together.
There's going to be 600,000 or so, teams.
Right.
And if Walker goes off 2.6 or 2.5 in 500,000 of them,
right.
If you take him at 1.8 and then come back with someone else in that same tier, it might not be the most optimal thing. Walker might not deserve to go 1.8, and if he did, he probably would. But that doesn't mean in one season he couldn't be the guy that, like I push up Ashton Genty. I'm not that high on CMC or Jonathan Taylor at ADP. I'll push up Ashton Genty because most people who pass on CMC and Taylor are going to take either Amon-Ra, Jefferson, or CeeDee Lamb. So I'll move up Genty or sometimes Barkley.
All right. Give me 3 players, good or bad, that you think are just wildly mispriced right now in best ball.
I think a lot of them, ADP's gotten very efficient. A lot of the players I thought were badly mispriced, the field has adjusted on. I pretty much covered a lot of the guys already. I talked about Ray Davis. Not only does he have contingent value if Cook gets hurt, they're talking about giving Cook more passing game work.
Yeah.
And to me, that means less Ty Johnson and more Ray Davis. He might have a bit of a floor. There's a couple guys. I'm not on Egbuka at cost.
Yeah.
He had that fast start. He faded. Yes, he was hurt a little bit. But I think there's a much better chance that Godwin or Jalen McMillan end up being, I think those three guys might all end up being pretty good together. And Egbuka goes really high. One I'm fading is Devontae Adams. I just think his ADP, it's fallen, but he's really getting up there in age. And he was propped up by just 18 touchdowns, something like that.
Crazy
right.
touchdowns.
Not that he can't do it again,
right?
But again, he's just not. That's one guy that I still would have liked to have seen fall more. How about you? Do you have a couple guys? Because I really am struggling to answer that question right now. There's guys I like a little. There's just nobody I want to plant a flag on.
The hardest part of my draft guide this year was probably, the research was a lot, but just the players to avoid section was tough. It's the market seems pretty efficient right now. I went with the approach more so with my avoid section for the guide of looking at specific platforms and saying this guy's just because it's a lot easier instead of looking at more consensus. But strictly from a best ball perspective, quarterback is always a position where you can't really have a strong take because you're just simply stacking for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. In a managed league, I'm going to probably not be as into a Joe Burrow, but if I have Jamar Chase or T Higgins in best ball, I'll still take Joe Burrow, I'm a little bit afraid, as you are, of Jonathan Taylor at his cost, just because of especially DK, where you get it's full PPR, so it's a little bit of a difference for a guy like JT who's maxed out an 11% target share.
I've got an interesting thought.
Yeah, what's that with JT?
Like in DFS in the old days, FanDuel and DraftKings, some Sundays you play a lot of one guy on one site because he was priced differently than another. I'm having a hard time drafting some of the pass catching backs. Not that there's as many as there used to be on Underdog, but they go basically in the same range on DraftKings. Guys like Woody Marks, Dylan Sampson, I think, is a tremendous pick on DraftKings.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of them.
So, I think that is one area where I think I'm seeing a lot of value is in those pass-catching backs on DraftKings.
Yeah, agreed. I'll say one player that I am very underweight on, and it's kind of contrarian because there's a lot of big names in the space that are very high on him as a sort of a middle round running back pick for just getting some points, is Tony Pollard.
I should have mentioned him. I think I have 1% Tony Pollard, and last year I had 23%.
Yeah, it's really, really a hard bet for me when you look at how he performed last year, specifically as a receiver. His yards per out run was really poor. It's been poor now for multiple seasons.
He's not a young man anymore either.
Not a young man. He had pretty bad splits with Tajay Spears last year, even if you're just looking at usage, right, and his route share when Tajay Spears was healthy. And I don't think Nick Singleton is necessarily a zero all season long. There's a chance that we see some Singleton down the stretch. And again, one of the pass catchers that you're talking about, Dylan Sampson late on DK, Tajay Spears is in the same boat where he could easily just be a pass catching, play from behind kind of back, which is how he's been deployed. I know it's a new coaching staff and such, but not only that, but Tennessee's offense could suck realistically. Yeah. That's also where things could go south. So I found myself in that Pollard range going more with Jalen Warren, Ramondre Stevenson, players that I've
the same.
And
I really like Warren because he could be the guy that they're dropping off 50, 60. Rodgers could be dropping off 50, 60 passes. And totally ultimately, agree. I think he's a better running back than Rico Dowdle, too.
Yeah, I agree. Jalen Warren, I think Jalen Warren, and this is maybe a slightly hot take, but I think he's one of the most underrated, real life running backs in the NFL, period. He's really good in all facets of the game.
And it's a new staff. It's a new game.
Yeah. I know that people are attached to the McCarthy Dowdle thing, and I get it, but I've leaned more Warren than Dowdle.
Yeah, everyone's attached to somebody until the other guy's better.
Yeah, right.
Ultimately, people underestimate how much coaches want to win. And
Yes.
how much Aaron Rodgers is going to be like, get this guy off the field and give me Jaylen Warren.
Yeah,
right?
Great pass protector, great pass catcher. I mean, there's a lot
Explosive.
to like about Jaylen Warren. Yeah.
I do think that is definitely a really, really good one. I like that. And Warren has become one of my favorite players. And I just think that in general, one of the underestimated things that I beat myself up for not doing in the past that I've gotten better at is if I don't like Pollard, and there's really only two guys, Singleton could do it, but he's coming off the foot. I'm up to about 18% on Tajay Spears. I've always had a lot of Spears. I loved him coming out. I thought he had some really unique skills. Yeah. And I think, but from just a strategic standpoint, if you're really down on one guy, make sure you take the backup, because then you're getting double pay. If
that
you're
helped
right.
that helped me so much last year with Chuba and Rico. Because
Yeah.
I was fading Chuba last year and naturally just gravitated towards Rico. And
that's awesome.
It's true. Yeah. It's very true. All right. Before I let you go, I am borderline sweating. You can kind of see it if you're watching on YouTube.
My takes weren't hot enough. I'm sorry.
I'm saying you got to give me one fire, bold take before I let you go, as I do with every guest. So throw it out there.
I got two. One is that Brock Bowers leads the NFL in receptions.
Okay. I like that.
And the other one is that one of Jonah Coleman or Damon Claiborne work out roles to start the season.
Yeah.
And that one of them ends up being the lead back going down the stretch.
Can I tell people a little bit of a secret here? First off, I've loved this conversation because it literally just devolved into a conversation.
Right.
It wasn't, this is what I think Becoming Best Ball Bro is all about and what I think people like to hear. But I'll share a little secret. Jonah Coleman right now is by far my highest exposed player on draft.
What do you like about him?
So my stance on Coleman from a prospecting standpoint and like with my model and going through all of that was Denver looked at J.K. Dobbins and said, hey, we like you, but we know that you're not durable, right? And not only that, they used J.K. Dobbins in a very one-dimensional way last year. He was not a pass catcher.
And they
for them
used
whatsoever.
Harvey pretty much the same.
Yeah, and Harvey was their pass catcher, and they're like I have a stance that I think Dobbins is actually the player that I'm least high on of the three by far, just because I don't see the ceiling outcome for him enough, just given the pass catching role that he has. But with RJ Harvey, they certainly see solid player. I thought as a prospect, he was a little bit overvalued by the market. I didn't mind him in redraft last year, but from a dynasty standpoint, I wasn't like jumping for joy about Harvey as a prospect.
I didn't like his tape.
Yeah, with that being said, I think he did have some explosion. I do think that he showed off some pass catching chops last year, right? And so in that environment, that he's getting some high, like if you look at his weighted opportunity last year, even with Dobbins, it wasn't because I think a lot of times people understate the value of a target, especially in a full PPR platform. And anyway, so they're looking at Jonah Coleman and they're saying, hey, we tried to rely on you down the stretch. You weren't reliable enough. One of the worst players in rushing yards over expected per attempt last year, could play a pass catching role. I think they still are going to use him in the red zone and in that sort of like gadgety way that they did last year. But Dobbins, they said, hey, I don't know if you could really carry this workload for us for the entire season. So let's get one of the most boring all around backs in this year's draft in Jonah Coleman, who is not explosive. That's what RJ Harvey brings to the table, but he can pass pro.
I think he's more explosive than people give him credit for.
There's a possibility. There's a definite possibility of that. But I do think that Harvey is more explosive.
There's no doubt about that
from a trait perspective.
Completely agree. I'm not a Harvey guy, but he is definitely
right. So my stance with Coleman is that he backs up both positions. He can play a pass catching role for them because he proved that in college and he was good at doing that in college as a 3-down guy. But he can be a bruiser too, and he might even get some goal line work as the season goes on, especially if they're worried about Dobbins and injury, etc., and seeing that short yardage stuff. So to me, Coleman is someone who should get some work in a 3-headed backfield. Like I think he's going to get something in that backfield, and you're buying 15th, 16th round in DraftKings, you're buying points late. That's all it is to me. but he has also multiple outs for contingent upside, right? Where if one of those two get hurt, he's all of a sudden going to be a 10 plus touch per game type player.
This ties into one of my hot takes, and you back to your first question. Everyone is convinced this running back class is crap, right? You've heard it, and overall it is.
Yeah, you're right. You heard it from me too.
But
right.
That doesn't mean there aren't going to be 2 or 3 guys who the NFL needs running backs every year. Guys get hurt, guys age out. So to me, Jonah Coleman does a couple things. One, he is very good at cutbacks. And when you have a big offensive line, that guy who can make that one cut, get upfield, I think Sean Payton's going to love that. Sean Payton's also going to love the fact that he can be on the field and you don't know whether it's going to be run or pass.
Right.
With Dobbins, yes, sometimes it's going to be a pass, but but my point is Jonah Coleman can play both sides. He can pass block. And the weird thing is he had more college receptions in each of his last 2 years than RJ Harvey did.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean a heck of a lot. College reception totals are completely unsticky. But when I first looked that up and saw it, I was like, there's something no one thinks.
I mean, even when I look at my adjusted receiving numbers in the ZAP model, Jonah Coleman still looks better than what RJ Harvey did from a receiving standpoint.
I'm glad to hear that because it's what I saw on tape.
Yeah.
And I'm no expert, but I really Jonah Coleman and Emmett Johnson have been my 2 highest owned guys. I just think Coleman has a clearer path to being the number 1.
It's just weird. Like, I just didn't like J.K. Dobbins. I loved him last year. I drafted a ton of Dobbins. I had him as a target. I love that we're just ending this show on some random Broncos backfield.
What best ball pros do.
That's what best ball pros do.
That's what best ball pros do.
Dobbins did not have the ceiling and the season, even when you just look at his output, that I think people believe he did. It's just that they got him at a good price and he was a value piece for them.
That's the other thing. They brought him back, but it wasn't like he was a priority bring back. He was out there for a couple weeks before they brought him back.
Yeah. And he's coming off an injury that no one talks about. That's the other piece to it. Yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, I could easily, we could look back at this in January.
Did you like Claiborne's tape?
I didn't mind Claiborne. He's undersized. That's the biggest issue. I think I've oddly this season turned into, I've never been a Jordan Mason guy. I'm drafting Jordan Mason for the first time.
I've been talked into
my
it.
Fantasy career.
Spike Week guys got me taking some.
Yeah. I've been for the first time drafting Jordan Mason when I've railed against him historically.
I kind of dug him, but I don't know. My memory must have been bad. I didn't think he was that good last year, but the numbers that Eric shared, yeah. So I think the Vikings offense, I think the Bucks offense are 2 really less expensive offenses that could be top 5 to 7 offenses.
Right. That could be good this year. Yeah. Agreed. All right, Todd, let everyone know where they can find you, all that good stuff. This was a great conversation.
I'm retired right now. I'm nowhere. I'm not podcasting on my own. I had a really good concept. No one wanted to hear about it. And so I am just trying to prove everyone wrong by kicking everyone's ass in best ball this year.
I love it. Good stuff. But you are on Twitter though.
At Best Ball NFL. Yes. And pretty easy to remember. And I really enjoyed this. And I hope we fight each other out for the top prize on DraftKings this year.
Agreed. Yeah, you were on last year, had some really great feedback from people. They loved it. So I had to bring you back again this year. And I really enjoyed, your insight. I think you bring, some uniqueness to the table from an analysis standpoint. So thank you for your time. Everyone else listening, thank you for your time as well. Hopefully you liked, the little rambling that Todd and I had at the end there.
No. I'm always very succinct.
Yeah, right. But make sure you check out lateround.com. The draft guide is out. That's being updated weekly. Check that out. It is for sale. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel and the podcast. But otherwise, everyone, thanks for tuning in.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.